Okay, testing. Can you hear me? Hello, Tabo. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. And I'm sorry, my neighbor, they play music. I'm not sure if we're gonna have. I'll be on mute.
You said you're going to be on mute. Yeah, that's fine. Not a problem. We have the chat. You should be able to see the screen.
Yes, I'm able to see your screen.
Okay, great. Okay, so the screen is important because that's obviously what we're going to be using just to show the actual content. So I'm just going to share this and then I'm going to cover the content. All right, let me just move this across. Okay, I see we've got another student joining. Okay, good evening, Palesa. Okay, looks like she's there. There she. Okay, perfect. Okay, so you are obviously part time. So, okay, you said I'm just going to mute the mic. I know there's some background noise. Okay, perfect. If you do want to use the microphone, please switch on the mic and you can talk to the class. The chat is open on the right. If any of you want to use the chat, it is available. We've waited 5 minutes and I'm going to start. We've got Palesa and Tabo joining us for the live session. Thank you for attending. First thing we're going to be looking at in terms of Financial Management 1 is we're going to be focusing on the course in terms of structure and what you're going to have to prepare for in terms of your assessments. So if you look at the actual Cole Campus platform, I hope all of you have logged in and you've looked at the actual platform to see what's available. The first few items here just highlight the welcome to Boston Media House, as well as a little bit about the module. If you've looked at the video from last week, which was covering week one's contents, we basically covered the focus for this particular subject, and we spoke about how the subject is broken up into three different levels. You've got level 1, level 2, and level 3. This is the first level, which is actually the most important because it gives you the background. It gives you the foundation. Once you've got the foundation, then you can move on and you can look at the next level, level 2 and level 3. So that's something to consider when looking at perspective. Okay, you're starting out at the base, okay, at the bottom, okay, foundation level, and we're looking at accounting as well as financial management. If you've looked at the actual textbook, you'll see the textbook covers multiple topics in the subject, ranging from the introduction all the way through to year-end procedures. So there's a lot. There's 12 chapters in total. We're going to be looking at the first few chapters, so chapters 1 to 3 for the first assessment, and then we'll be looking at 4, 5, and 6 for the next, and then obviously the last 6 in the next half of the year. Currently, obviously, because of lockdown rules and regulations, it is an adjusted level 3 lockdown, but campus is still a little bit restricted in terms of hosting live on campus classes. There are classes obviously being hosted, but those are primarily for the practical subjects. So, for example, television, radio, the graphic design, that type of thing. So, obviously, Boston Media House is trying their best to provide students with classes, and as soon as we know when we can actually go back on campus, management will make that announcement and we will host live in-person workshops on campus. In the meantime, we're obviously hosting things online, so we have live Zoom classes every 2 weeks, and then we've got pre-recorded content as well, covering all the theory in the textbook. So if you've watched the first video for week 1, you would have seen I've covered chapter 1, which was very short. It was looking at the first 12 pages of the textbook and highlighting and covering information regarding what this topic involves. Okay, what is financial management? A little bit of accounting as well. Chapter 2 is taking it a bit further, and here we're actually focusing on the objectives, the purposes of accounting and the record keeping. So that's something that we'll also look at. Just to highlight something on the actual Cole Campus platform, there are announcements here as well as discussions and modules that you can obviously access and view. The first thing is just the announcements that have been posted. Janet is the acting academic manager for this particular course. She has posted a little link here regarding accessing the video links on Cole Campus. I hope you've logged in and you've actually checked what's online. I'm just drawing this to your attention purely because we have had some queries from students regarding not being able to access some of the videos. So there is a how-to guide here that you can actually click and download to assist you if you are struggling to watch the actual content, the pre-recorded videos and lectures. I am recording this particular lesson, so what's on screen and the audio from the lesson is going to be recorded, and this will obviously be sent to management, and then they'll upload this onto Cole Campus as well. There is only one Cole Campus, and all your course material for both full-time and part-time are on this one platform. So if you go to modules, you'll see there's an introduction, and then there's week 1 content. I see this was updated earlier today. This morning we didn't have the roadmap, and obviously the Zoom class, that was the Zoom class from earlier today. So Janet has uploaded some additional content. Obviously the class tonight, the one that we're hosting today, will also be uploaded as a separate link. Obviously there'll be 2. One will be full-time, one will be part-time, but you can watch both. I will try cover slightly different examples, so it's not too much of a duplication. So if some students do want to attend both classes or watch both videos, at least you can still benefit from full-time and part-time. Okay, when we get to later topics, then I'll look at different activities. I might do one activity with full-time, one activity with part-time, still covering the same content though, but just doing 2 different questions. So at least students have twice as much video content to obviously use to help them with their studies. Okay, and then just one final word about the actual management of the course. If you scroll further down, obviously my details are there. There is a new academic manager that we're still waiting to be appointed. Last year's academic manager, Pranisha, I don't know if any of you know her. Most of you are in second year now because you would have studied last year because financial management is only offered in the second year. So students in their second, third, and fourth year, their final year, would obviously do financial management. So you've been at Boston for 1 year now, covering your BBA. Maybe you remember Pranisha. Pranisha Naika was the previous academic manager. Unfortunately, she had resigned end of last year. So we're still waiting for an appointment. As I said, the acting academic manager is Janet, and Janet is the one that's going to help us manage the course. Okay, so if you do have any queries or comments, I'm going to obviously provide you with her details if you do want to contact her, but we're still waiting for that information from Boston Media House in terms of who the new academic manager is going to be. All right, we've spoken about the course content. Just one last note regarding the discussions. If you go to the discussions, I've posted a whole bunch of different let's say links covering different topics. So if you have looked at the actual Cole Campus platform, there were posts from last week. Those are still available, and those posts act as a way for you to practice some of the content that's covered in the actual textbook. So you've got a pre-recorded video which teaches the content, and then you've got discussion group considerations here to get you to engage more with the actual practical aspects of the course. For example, if you look at this discussion, chapter 1 is focusing on accounting versus financial management. I've given a few instructions there just in terms of reviewing the course content and then considering these questions. So those are questions that you can actually consider maybe in terms of your own world of work. All of you that are attending tonight are part-time students, so you definitely have a role in industry. It might even be the media industry specifically. So if you do have a role in media, you might want to apply some of these concepts to the world of work. So when looking at media businesses, you could look at your own perhaps, you could look at the companies that you work for, or you could look at other examples. So the ones that I've covered in terms of course content was NASPERS and Process. Okay, Process is new. Okay, they're a new company. They actually got unbundled or separated from NASPERS. Right, so once upon a time, about 2.5 years ago, Naspers and Process went through the process of splitting out part of the business, right? And a lot of companies do that. So even Naspers, once upon a time, okay, multi-choice. I've had lots of students in the past, part-time students actually, that have worked at multi-choice. And did you know multi-choice was actually part of Naspers once upon a time? But obviously in today's world. So as we sit here today, February 2021, MultiChoice is its own public company. Naspers is its own public company. So you should have a pretty good idea of what the different forms of ownership are. If you don't know, we'll look at it just now when we go through chapter 1, just to recap week 1 and week two's course content. In chapter 1, you would have been exposed to the different types of businesses that you get. And hopefully you've read up on some of those businesses and you understand how they're structured. You know a public company is listed on the JSE. All right, yes, there's a note here in the chats. Tabo is an employee of MultiChoice. Awesome. Okay, yeah, so as I said, I've had lots of students, part-time students especially, that have been employed and do work for MultiChoice. Right, even some of last year's graduates and the year before were MultiChoice employees. So really, really, really grateful to have another MultiChoice employee in the class. I've always had very good interactions with students that are in industry because they can bring real world examples to class. So thank you for sharing that. I know we have Palesa in the class. Palesa, I'm not too sure if your mic is working. If you want to speak to us, you can, or maybe if you want to just type something in the chat, maybe you can also introduce yourself to the class. It is always nice to obviously network. It's a pity we're not on campus, because if we were, then obviously maybe Tabo and Palesa, because you're both part-time, maybe you could exchange details and form like a study group. But it's totally up to you. I'm not going to force you to interact. I'm just going to put that suggestion out there. If you do want to obviously communicate amongst yourselves, it does help, and it's also a nice way to build a network. Especially as part-time students, it's always nice to expand your network depending on the different students you have in class. Okay. All right. So I've just highlighted that just as a note. This is still open, so please, if you do want to engage on the platform, maybe share your thoughts and comments regarding some of the questions that was posted, looking specifically at content from chapter 1. Okay, something I will highlight a bit later when we look at the actual chapter. I'm just going to recap and revise some of the key aspects that you should have covered in chapter 1, and then we'll obviously continue and look at chapter 2 as well. Okay, that was just a note about the Cole campus discussion questions and engagement. All right, please make use of the Cole campus platform as much as you can. There is a WhatsApp group as well that is available here. For those students that haven't joined the group yet, you're more than welcome to. This is just an additional form of communication. If students have anything urgent that they want answered, or questions, or if they want to raise something, you can use that. If there are questions relating to course content, if it's something that I feel students can also benefit from, then I am going to take those questions from WhatsApp and I'll obviously post it to Cole Campus so everybody is available and is and can access it. Okay, I'm just reading the chat here. I saw a message pop up. Yes, Palesa, welcome. Thank you very much for attending. Looking forward to engaging with everyone. Perfect. Yes, that's great. Thank you so much for that message in the chat. Okay, so as I said, try use this to help you with your studies as well. If anything pops up in WhatsApp, then I'll obviously take those queries or questions through to Cole Campus, so everybody has the same set of course content. Okay, remember it's one platform for full-time and part-time, so some of the full-time students might also engage and answer some of these questions. It's open to all the students, so you can all benefit and you can all learn as well from each other's questions. All right, so that's enough in terms of admin. Unless there's specific questions that you might have, you can ask me in the chat. I'm going to put up the textbook again and just highlight some important points from the first chapter, just to recap content that you would have covered covering week 1 and 2's roadmap. Okay, so when looking at chapter 1, it's a very, very short chapter, and if you've gone through the content, you'll see it's very, very much focused on theory. Okay, no workings, no calculations. If you've looked at the overview, okay, there's a video covering the overview. In that video, you would have seen we spoke about the requirements for the course. You just need to obviously have stationery with you, maybe like a notebook or something that you can make notes in, and then obviously your textbook. Your textbook is yours. Every year, new students join Boston Media House, and every year, students get a new textbook. So please highlight, write in pencil, pen, put little notes for yourselves in the actual textbook, because it's yours to keep, and it's yours to use in terms of your studying as well. Right, so everything is in the textbook. I've put it up on screen so you can see all the information. Don't be afraid to highlight, circle, put little notes. Try and make your studying as simple and easy as possible. Right, this is your notes, and this is your textbook. Every year, new textbooks are given to the students, so try use the textbook as best as you can to make your studying as easy as possible. Okay, all right, so let's start off just with introduction. The most important thing to take away here is just general outcomes. Okay, so what are you going to learn from chapter 1? Well, some of the main things would be businesses. So in other words, what type of business is best for a media organization? Sole proprietor, partnership, CC, company. There are many different forms of businesses. I don't want to recap or cover too much of content that I've already filmed for you. I want to try to focus on more practical things, okay, things that we can apply our theory to. So when we look at activities, that's a perfect opportunity to practice what you've learned from the content in the actual textbook. The first thing we need to look at is obviously the goal. Okay, so what is the goal of a business? Maybe if you could type that in the chat. What is the goal of the business? Just give me one word that describes what you're aiming for. What would you want to achieve? What is the goal? Any idea? Anyone? Anyone want to try give us a one-word answer? Okay, tell me what the focus is. It's actually on screen if you've gone through this. Ooh, profit. Interesting answer. Okay, that's not the primary goal. That's one of the goals. Okay, so I don't disagree, but I wouldn't say it's the focus. Yes, that's better. Okay, so when you look at the actual primary goal, the primary goal of any business is not to create a profit. The primary goal of any business is to generate more value or wealth. That's the primary goal, right? Because if you said profit is the focus, well then most businesses probably won't even start, because most businesses aren't profitable when they start. Some businesses can take years to become profitable. If you've watched the video from last week, you would have seen I've shared an example of a real world company, one of the largest companies in the world. Right, maybe you've watched it. If you haven't, I'm going to give it away. It's the company Twitter. Okay, excuse me, how many of you use Twitter? I'm sure quite a few of you. Right, and what is Twitter? Twitter is a social media platform, okay, that was created a few years ago, around 2000 and something. Okay, I think it was 2006, somewhere around there. Twitter was created roughly 20 years ago, okay, in the teens. Twitter is still very, very young in terms of being a company. But if you look at their results, Twitter never ever made a profit in terms of the years of operating until more recently. So for years, Twitter has never made a profit. If that was the goal, well then Twitter would have closed in the first few years, because they never ever made a profit. So the primary focus that we should always look at is this: value, not wealth. Right? And how do we measure value? And see, these are things that you'll learn about later on. Assets versus liabilities. Right, that's a better indication of value rather than profit. Profit is income minus expenses. Okay, but you don't know that yet. You will in the next chapter when we cover more of the accounting. So just to highlight some of these key concepts. Assets and liabilities has nothing to do with income and expenses. They're separate. And that's something you'll learn about when we get to the accounting part of the module and you start learning about these different types of accounts. Value is looking at this, assets and liabilities. If you go look at Twitter, they've always had assets and they've always had more assets than their liabilities. Yes, they've never made a profit, but they're still very, very valuable. And that's the focus. Right? And that's very important to understand because all companies go through problems. All companies have good times and bad times. Even if we just take COVID, for example, last year and how that has affected many businesses. Some businesses have made a profit, even during COVID. Okay, if you look at companies like, I'm just going to use MultiChoice as an example. Right, MultiChoice is entertainment, DSTV, okay, Showmax, those type of products and services. Right, so companies like that would probably do better, obviously when people are staying at home and being let's say what's the word? I wouldn't say trapped, but trapped is not the right word, but being isolated at home, perhaps, okay, in terms of regulation and so on. Obviously, things are a bit different now, but some businesses have done better during COVID than before. Online businesses have done very well. And then you have other businesses that might not have done as well. Okay, think of restaurants. Would restaurants have made a profit last year? Okay, probably not. Right, last year we had the hard lockdown, we had much higher levels of lockdown, and obviously restaurants were not allowed to operate. Okay, even now restaurants are a bit restricted. Okay, in terms of alcohol sales and so on. All right, but the point is that businesses don't always make a profit. Businesses sometimes make a loss. Okay, yes, you would rather want a profit than a loss, obviously, but if you look at COVID and you look at last year's performance, businesses that were affected by COVID, businesses that were asked to close, those businesses probably made losses. But does that mean they're going to close and never open again? No. All right, you are going to go through difficult times. Okay, in economics, they call that a recession. Okay, so if profit is the motive, if that's the only motive, if that's the primary goal, well, as soon as you stop making a profit, well then, during a recession, you're literally going to stop operating and you'll close the business. Right, that's not the case when you're focusing on value. Okay, value is big picture thinking. Right, Twitter thought about value in terms of communication and how people use social media. Right, Twitter has never made a profit until more recently. Okay, please watch the video from last week and you'll see exactly what I mean. Okay, I actually showed the Twitter financial statements and I talked to that as an example. So the point I'm trying to make here is please understand that the primary goal of any business, it doesn't matter which one, it can be small, medium, or large. Okay, those businesses should, if they're focusing on the right thing, they should be focusing on value and wealth. Okay, because profit's not the be all and end all. Okay, because if profit's the only motive, then you could have a scenario like this. I just want to scroll further down to show you this example in the textbook. Steinhoff. Hopefully you're familiar with Steinhoff. If you're not familiar with Steinhoff, please have a look at activity 1B. There's a little bit of information here regarding Steinhoff, and obviously there's a link as well to additional information that you can consider here at the bottom. Okay, more detailed information regarding Steinhoff, FIN24, CNBC Africa, and there's another article from FIN24. Right, those articles basically focus on value and profit, but the only motive that Steinhoff ever had was profit, chasing profit at any expense. Okay, so was Steinhoff profitable? Yes, they were. But did Steinhoff create value? No, they didn't. Right, Steinhoff showed more and more and more profit, but it was done based on fraud. Okay, corporate fraud and corruption in the company. Okay, the ex-CEO is still being investigated, and some board of directors as well, because of accounting irregularities, maladministration, etc., etc. Right, those are things that aren't good in terms of value. Okay, why would you want fraud, corruption, accounting irregularities in a company? Is that going to add value? Does that add value? The answer is obviously no. Okay, but does that increase or show more profit? It can. Okay, because accounting is just a way of recording information. So what they did at Steinhoff is obviously not allowed. Okay, you're not allowed to show fictitious income, okay, or to show more income than what's actually real. Okay, so obviously accounting irregularities is the problem, and this is obviously an ongoing investigation. All right, so just remember, profit, value, which is more important? Value, obviously. If you create enough value for enough people, you will automatically become profitable. All right, and that's another example in terms of media would be Netflix. Okay, this is a company that has done very, very well, okay, in recent times, purely because it's an internet business. Okay, there's no need for satellite, there's no need for anything else other than are you connected to the internet? Okay, so companies like Netflix, they're valuable and they're profitable, right? But the focus is on value first. Okay, no one knew about Netflix 5, 10, maybe even 15 years ago. Netflix is a very, very new company, okay, in terms of streaming. Streaming is a very, very new concept. Okay, you couldn't stream back in the day because internet speeds were very, very slow. Okay, I'm not too sure what the average age is in the class, but maybe some of you remember growing up in your households, perhaps. Okay, all of you are obviously working full-time and studying part-time. Maybe you can remember when you were a child, perhaps, in your household, or ask your parents and grandparents, right, in terms of internet. Did they have internet growing up? The chance are is probably not. And even if they did, it was dial-up. Okay, dial-up modems. The speeds that we had back in the day were terrible, okay, compared to today. Today we've got fiber, we've got 5G, we've got all sorts of telecommunication tools and networks that we can use that make businesses like this possible. Netflix is possible because of the internet. If it wasn't for the internet, Netflix wouldn't exist. Okay, same with other companies as well. A lot of companies wouldn't exist because technology has enabled them. So if we didn't have the technology, we wouldn't have those businesses. Okay, so an example that I spoke about this morning was Zoom. Okay, so I used Zoom this morning for the discussion. Tonight I'm using Netflix. Okay, I'm just using a different example to show how powerful technology can be. Right, because we have some students in the actual media industry, multi-choice. Okay, multi-choice wouldn't have existed without technology, and the services that they're providing now wouldn't be as good if the technology didn't advance and didn't get better. Okay, so just remember that value is the focus. Right, remember your products and services need to be consumed by people. Okay, consumers, customers. Right, if enough people buy into this, then you ultimately make profits. Something that we won't look at in this course, but we will look at in others, is break-even points. Okay, that's something I'll leave for the next level, okay, level 2. But we'll look at that. Okay, break-even point means when do we actually start making a profit? Okay, in other words, how many customers do I need? How many subscribers do I need before Netflix becomes profitable? How many subscribers do I need before DSTV becomes profitable? Okay, those are things that you need to know from a financial management perspective. All right, so the point I'm trying to make is when looking at this particular course, okay, when looking at the introduction, chapter 1, everyone has a role to play, right? If you've looked at activity 1A, you'll see this particular activity focuses on different roles: shareholders, creditors, credit providers, employees, governments. Okay, something that I want to address here, the difference between a creditor and a credit provider. Does anyone know? Is there a difference? Anyone want to try answer that in the chat? is there a difference between a creditor and a credit provider? If you don't know, that's fine. You can just say not sure in the chat. That's fine. I just want to see if anyone is aware of the difference. Maybe you've heard these terms. Not sure. Okay. All right. So a creditor is someone that will give you goods. Okay. So if I buy goods from a retailer or a wholesaler, okay, and I'm buying from them on credit, they would be my creditor. Okay, those are things that we'll learn about in the next chapter, but it came up in this chapter, but it came up in terms of a role, right? So a creditor has a role that they play. We can approach creditors for goods, right? How else can you buy goods? You need money. Where do we get money from? We get money from credit providers. Okay, don't worry about that. It's just a little link just telling me that the meeting time is obviously progressing. Okay, so creditors providing us with goods, long-term credit providers providing us with money, right? A bank would be a credit provider. Okay, a bank wouldn't be a creditor, right? If I'm buying goods from a supplier, those suppliers that I buy from would be my creditors because I owe them, right? So those are two different role players. And the point I'm trying to make with this discussion is that everybody has a role to play and they will all influence our business. Okay, so the influence that they have on our business is very, very, very important to understand, because if we know how they impact or influence our business, we can then make better decisions. And those decisions are important because those decisions can either help you to add more value, or those decisions will destroy value depending on what you've got. Okay, so just remember that chapter 1 is focusing on financial management. It's an introduction. We need to understand the primary goal. Why do businesses operate? And then something else to consider, which is the last thing in the actual chapter, is the agency problem. What is the agency problem? Well, the word agency, the word agent is in the actual word. Okay, agent, agency. Okay, so an agent would be someone that would act on your behalf. Right, so maybe some of you are familiar with an estate agent. Right, when you're buying or selling property, you would get an estate agent. That agent is going to act on your behalf, either on your behalf as the buyer or on your behalf as the seller. It just depends. Right, so when you look at the agency problem, this is when you have a conflict of interest. Conflict of interest means when everyone isn't always aiming or striving for the same thing, right? And that's possible when you have shareholders and you have managers or directors, right? Hopefully the CEO or the managers and directors, hopefully they're also shareholders, because that would eliminate some of the agency problem. But what the agency problem is if you give away the decision making. In other words, shareholders, okay, let me draw a little picture here. PTY Ltd. Okay, PTY Ltd, private company. Okay, if this was a public company, you would have many, many, many shareholders. But let's just look at a few. Okay, so assuming we had, let's say, 5 shareholders. Okay, and then those shareholders obviously own the company, right? But not all the shareholders will be running the company, right? Let's assume we have one CEO, okay, and that CEO is going to be managing and running the company on behalf of the shareholders. Hopefully, the CEO is also going to be a shareholder, but assuming they're not, assuming the CEO doesn't hold any shares, but they're only employed to run the company. In other words, they're acting like a management MD, okay, a managing director. So they're managing the company, but they don't own any shares in the company. Right? That is possible. But if you're looking at the CEO, would the CEO always act in the best interest of the company? Not always, because if you're looking at the CEO's role, okay, and the shareholders, right, they have two different roles. The one person runs the company, the one person owns the company. Okay, so owners versus employees. Okay, we could even use that. All right, you could have an employee, okay, who doesn't own any shares in the company, but who's very, very important. Someone like the MD, maybe, the managing director. And then they would have to make decisions on behalf of the company. Right, so are they always going to act in the best interest of the shareholders? Not always. Sometimes employees, sometimes owners. Okay, when I say owners, okay, I'm referring to the shareholders. Sometimes the owners and the employees don't always have the same goal, don't always have the same focus, and that's something that can create this agency problem. All right, so agency problem is where you have other people running the business, and they don't always act in the best interests of the people that own the business, right? And that's quite a tricky or a difficult thing to manage. Okay, it's tricky to balance that because you need to weigh up the pros and the cons. Okay, if shareholders also want to run the company, well then that's a full-time job. Okay, so if shareholders are also going to run the company, do they have the time? Do they have the expertise? Do they have the effort to run the company? Maybe, maybe not. Okay, so that's the agency problem in a nutshell. It's a conflict of interest where you have different interests, and those interests aren't always met or satisfied. Okay, right. I hope that makes sense. I'm just trying to give you a bit more depth, okay, a bit more detail with regard to the agency problem by trying to show an example. Okay, the agency problem is described in this example 1b. Right, Steinoff has an agency problem. Okay, Marcus Euster and the other directors, okay, they're obviously directors, CEOs, people that are at the highest level in the company. They run the company. Sometimes they don't always act in the best interest of the company, right? Because if you look at Steinoff, where's my pen? Here's my pen. Okay, Steinoff was a huge company once upon a time. Share price over 300 Rand a share. Okay, today, share price around 2 Rand a share. Okay, comes back to what we said earlier. Have they created value? No, they have destroyed value. Value has been destroyed. Okay, Steinoff is a less valuable company now than they were before. And it's all got to do with the agency problem, fraud, corruption from the directors, okay, the CEO, etc. Right, so when you're looking at this example, right, sometimes those people that we choose to act on our behalves. Okay, remember, Steinoff is a huge company, or let me say Steinoff was a huge company, and many people were invested in Steinoff. Governments was invested. Okay, the PIC, okay, was invested in Steinoff. Maybe your pension fund was invested in Steinoff. Maybe you were invested in Steinoff. Right, other companies were invested in Steinoff. Steinoff was a huge company, one of the top companies in South Africa, and now they're not even in the top 100. Okay, they're close to the bottom 100 in terms of value. All right, so just appreciate that the agency problem can destroy value rather than add value, especially when businesses aren't being run correctly. All right, and that's why financial management is important, because value should be first and then profit comes afterwards. Right, because you can show more profit if you're acting unethically. Okay, if you're acting unethically, you can maybe sell goods, okay, that are defective or that are broken, and that's going to increase sales. But does that create value? No, it doesn't. Okay, customers will be unhappy with defective or broken goods or damaged goods. All right, so just keep that in mind when you're looking at the agency problem. It's a very important concept, and sometimes you'll be asked to apply it practically as well. Okay, just going to chapter 2, just highlighting some of the points covered in the first part of the chapter. Right, if you've watched week 2's content, you would have seen I haven't covered all of the chapter. Okay, the rest of the chapter will be covered next week in week number 3. Please have a look at Cole Campus. There is a roadmap. That was something that I mentioned earlier today. Janet had uploaded it onto Cole Campus, so students are able to download and view it. You only need to go up until page, I think it's page 19. I'll just double check, but it's in the roadmap. All right, so please have a look at the roadmap, and you'll see exactly what I'm referring to. Okay, I'm just going to quickly end the session and just continue. This is going to time out in any second. It says less than a minute up here. So please just join again. It's one meeting link, but I'm going to have to start the class again because Zoom will time out because of the 40-minute restriction. All right, so let's take a quick maybe 5-minute break if you don't mind, and then let's start the class again, and then we've got another 40 minutes if we need to cover more content. Okay, I see Tabo's joined us. We've got Tejofatso as well. Thank you for joining us. Zoom is going to time out, so I will start the class again. There, timed out. Recording is on. Yes, okay. All right, so Palesa, we were talking about the goal for any business. And then we said in chapter 2, we're focusing on interpretation of information. And in terms of the roadmap, you only need to cover the first half of chapter 2. Right, so please just stick to the course content and just follow the uploaded pre-recorded videos as well. You'll see I've gone through the brief history of accounting as well as the double entry and then some uses and uses of accounting. What I want to do now in the live session is obviously address questions. If students have any questions they want me to cover. Something else that I also want to do is look at activities. So I'm going to just scroll further down. Again, just to recap some of the more important points from the chapter. Language of business, very important to understand. That you can maybe even highlight in your textbook. When you're looking at accounting, accounting is just that. It's a language for business. So when talking about business, you need to know what these different accounts are because those accounts are going to be used in business. When someone talks about an asset, we need to know exactly what that means. When someone talks about income, we need to know what that means. Liabilities, expenses, capital, drawings. Those are all accounts that we need to know in order to better familiarize ourselves with this language of business. Right, and all of you are working full-time and studying part-time. So some of these terms are probably more familiar with all of you because you've heard it already in business. Okay, businesses want to know how much assets they have. Businesses want to know how much income they have. Businesses want to know how much expenses they have. It's part of business. And that's why it's so important to study some accounting. Okay, we're not studying to be a CA, but we're studying to be a media executive. And to be a good media executive, to be a really impressive manager, okay, in media, you need to have some level of understanding of finance and accounting. If you have both, it can help you make better decisions because those topics relate to transactions. And that's the last thing that we'll be looking at in chapter 2, types of transactions. And we'll start analyzing and interpreting some of the transactions. And that's where we're moving towards, okay, in terms of analysis. Chapter 1 and 2, mainly theory. No workings, no calculations, all theory, okay? There are a few rules and things that we need to remember, and then the workings and calculations come up later on, okay, which we'll look at in other chapters. For now, just to highlight important points from chapter 2, the double entry system. Okay, what is the double entry? Well, there is quite a bit of history, and if you watch week 2's video, you'll see I talk to some of those points. Because it's the live session, I want to ask you if you know what the double entry system is. Any idea? Palesa? Do you know what it is? You can use your mic or you can use the chats. I see you're the only student in class. We've lost the other two. So you can decide what's easiest for you. Any idea what the double entry system is? Any idea? Okay, accounting concept where where can you complete the idea? Where assets equal liabilities on his equity. Okay, not quite. Well, I see you do have some knowledge of accounting. So it looks like you have studied accounting before, perhaps. Right. Maybe for those of you that haven't studied accounting before, you don't need to have studied accounting before. This course is going to give you everything that you do need to have all the necessary accounting skills and knowledge. Right. So Palesa looks like she knows a bit more about accounting. This is actually the accounting equation. Right, the accounting equation is an application question that uses the double entry, but it's not the double entry. Okay, so just to answer the question, a double entry is just every debit has a credit. In other words, every debit must have a credit. So they're equal. Okay, debits equal credits. Right, and that's also relevant in a trial balance. Right, trial balance is something else that will be discussed later on in chapter 2. For now, we just need to understand that when looking at a double entry, it's a double entry because there's two sides to the transaction. There's a debit side and there's a credit side. That's the double entry. If you look at the users and the uses of financial information, again, this is theory. Theory that speaks to the importance of having good financial information. And this is something that I've asked students to engage with on the actual Cole Campus platform. Right, what users can you think of? What uses can you think of? How do people use the financial information to make decisions? Right, uses and uses, the textbook provides you with some. And then they talk about the uses. Okay, uses. The uses of accounting information is more important because we need to know what the purpose is. In other words, what are we going to do with the information? Right, so if you've looked at your learning outcomes and you've looked at your subject outline, the premise that we always use when looking at the actual course content is knowing, doing, and being. There are some things we need to know, there's some things we need to do, and if I know and I do, then I become. And that's what we're looking at here in terms of the doing. Right, the use would be the doing. How do I use the information? Right, so if I know what condition, okay, what financial condition the business is in, can I use that information? Yes, I can. Right, I can do something to help the company rather than harm the company. Same with this question. Has the business activity resulted in a profit or loss? Same thing applies. What information do I need to use? Okay, so what's going to tell me if the business has made a profit or loss? Well, I need to know the income and I need to know the expenses. And if I have both, I can determine whether they've made a profit or a loss and I can use the information correctly. Right, so there's a lot that you can consider here in terms of use. It's important to apply what you know to different scenarios, and that's the whole purpose of those discussion questions on Cole Campus. Right, what can you think of in terms of a use? What can you think of, or who can you think of in terms of a user? Right, so those are things that I'm going to ask all of you. Okay, those of you that are watching the video, and obviously Palesa, you've attended live, is to think about that. Okay, when you're living your day-to-day and you're going through work and life, right, always think about use. Right, so now that I have this information, it doesn't always have to be accounting information, but obviously the focus in financial management is accounting because that's the information we're going to use. And that's something that we need to understand, is knowledge is important, but it needs to be used. Right, so what if you know what the income is? So what if you know what the expenses are? Can you use the information? So in other words, can you work out the profit or the loss? And that's the important bit. Right, the important bit is being able to take the information and to apply it to different scenarios. And that's where the practice comes into it. So please have a look at those activities that come up in the actual textbook. So far, I've only shown activities from chapter 1. This is the only activity that we have here that speaks to chapter 2 before we end the content for this week. Okay, week 3, I should say, will cover the rest of chapter 2, and then we'll look at other activities. All right, so the last bit for this week, just to wrap up week 1 and 2's content, is can you think of an advantage and a benefit of using financial information? How can it help us? In other words, what can we use it for, and how does it help us? Information is very, very helpful. For example, Boston will have a timetable. That timetable helps you to plan. Okay, I'm just using one example. Okay, it's not financial information. A timetable of classes at Boston Media House is not financial information. That's got nothing to do with finance at all. Okay, it's not even accounting. Right, but having a timetable helps us to plan, because now we know when we have what class, and we know what to plan for, or how to prepare, or what subjects I need to revise or go over content. That's something to consider in terms of a benefit. Okay, so what is the benefit? I can be more organized. Right, can you imagine if Boston didn't have a timetable? Right, there would be a disadvantage. There would be a problem. Okay, we can't not have a timetable. Right, so can you think of an advantage or a benefit for financial information? Anything. Just give me an advantage, something good. Give me a good thing, something that's good. How does financial information help us? Does anything come to mind? Yeah, you've really engaged well today. You've typed a lot of the answers in the chat, also in the first session. So just want to get your thoughts on that point. A benefit? An advantage? Yes, tracking business development. Perfect. Okay, performance evaluation. Definitely. Right, all businesses need to track and keep track of people and business in general, okay, to develop things further. So financial information can definitely help you with that. How do you know if the salespeople are doing well? You need to track their sales. Right, imagine not tracking their sales. Imagine not accounting for the sales. So we've got a sales team, and no one ever measures that. No one ever accounts. Okay, notice the word I'm using, account. Okay, accounting. Accounting is just that. It's a process to account or to keep track. I like what you've used there. You've used the word keeping track. Okay, tracks the business development. Okay, tracking is important. Accounting is important. Account or track is just two words that just have different contexts. Okay, accounting is exactly that. It's a form of tracking, but tracking financial stuff. Right, so if someone sells something, we need to keep track of that. All right, perfect. All right, so there are other advantages, there are other benefits. I'm going to leave you with those, and you can try identify more. Okay, there is a discussion on Cole Campus to encourage students to add their thoughts and opinions there. I'm hoping students use the platform a bit more. Okay, it's obviously still early days. Okay, we're only week 2. We've only covered our first live session covering week 1 and 2's content. We will have more of these sessions. As I said earlier, I think you might have missed that first part, but I did mention it. I'm just going to mention it again before we wrap up. We will be having on-campus workshops at a later stage, but that's subject to management's communication. So management at Boston Media House will announce when we will have those workshops, and then we'll obviously have on-campus classes to cover specific topics, things that students might be struggling with. Okay, but in the meantime, we're doing things online. Just remember, you have weekly pre-recorded videos that cover all the content. All right, so those videos that you have online work through all these pages. Okay, so I've literally taken each of these pages and I've covered them in that specific video. Okay, and then the live sessions. These sessions are mainly to wrap up, okay, and to cover content that we've covered during the week, and to ask students if they need any help with anything specific. Right, so Tabo didn't have anything earlier. I haven't asked you, so I'm just going to ask you before we wrap up. Was there anything that you had covered from chapter 1 and 2 that I might not have covered tonight that you want me to go over in more detail? Something that you might need more clarity on, maybe an activity you want me to go over. Is there anything else that I might have missed that you want me to cover tonight? Okay, message in the chat. Okay, you're all sorted. Awesome. That's amazing. All right, so thank you so much. Thank you for the message in the chat as well. I do appreciate it. Thank you so much for your time as well. Thank you for attending. I know it's quite late, but I know students obviously have some problems attending the 5:30 class. So what we will do in future is I am available from 5:30, and I'm obviously monitoring and checking Cold Campus to see if I need to respond to any questions. But depending on what we're covering, I might start our session a bit earlier as well, just so I can cover more content with you, so we can get through as much as we possibly can to help you as much as I can. All right, so thank you so much, Palesa. Thank you for attending the live session. This video will be uploaded onto Cold Campus. I will send it to Janet. To those of you that are watching the video, please make sure you do the activities and you keep up. If you just work through it week by week by week, you'll all be fine, and you'll do well. Okay. Thank you, Palesa. Have a great evening. Take care and stay safe.